Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are all doing well. This is Dr. Balke coming back at you. Um, Before we get into the lecture today, I just want to tell you this is week 2, so we are going to start doing the environmental systems and things like that. Remember, you have chapter 2 from the text to do. The review sheet is posted for you, and this review sheet is actually due Sunday, September 13th, midnight by midnight. All right. So you have until then to do that. Just download it wherever it's attached. I think it's attached right here. Okay. So you can download it and do the required review sheet. And then also we have due this week is your first current event, I believe. All right. Um, which you can attach here, and that is due Friday by September 11th. Remember, you can go to the course content area and inside the course content area, you will find assignments, directions, and examples. And here you'll see current event guidelines and examples. So download this. It'll give you an example of what I'm looking for the current events. And then I have this also handy dandy little tool here, video that will show you how to source something in Microsoft Word if you don't know what it is, because part of your grade is properly sourcing that article that you're telling me about, right? So that is your homework for this week. So this is due Friday, and this is due Sunday by midnight, all right? And then I also have week 3s up here for you too. And I'm kind of changing on the same Sunday. This is going to be due Sunday, but now I'm going to change your current events to Wednesdays. So instead of having Friday, I just thought I'd give you an extra day this week, but from now on, we're going to try to have this class every day, every week on Wednesdays. You'll have something to do at midnight, and then every Sunday you'll have something to do at midnight. The review sheets will always be Sunday by midnight, and current event. And actually, next week you can do what's called a podcast. You can listen to the podcast and answer the questions. So we won't be doing a current event that week, but it's a different assignment. I'll tell you about that when we get a little bit closer to on week 5 here. Okay. So it's going to be Wednesday you have an assignment due, and every Sunday night you have an assignment due. All right, try to keep it even from just throughout the semester from now on. Okay. So if anybody has any questions on that, you can just tell me or ask me, and I'll help you out. Okay. And don't forget, all these class PowerPoints are up here on Blackboard for your review to help you study and do your worksheets. And also, I'm posting the class videos. So you have lecture 1, lecture 2, and this is lecture 3, which I'll post as soon as I am done loading it up on YouTube and getting going. Okay? So if you guys have any questions, please don't be afraid to contact me. And just remember, keep it. This week we have a Friday assignment due, but after that, it's going to be every Wednesday and every Sunday. Every Wednesday and every Sunday by midnight. Okay? All right, so let us get into chapter 2 of the book here. What just happened? Get out of here. So chapter 2, we were going to be talking about environmental systems, matter, energy, and ecosystems. So we're going to get started down to some of the basic, fundamental environmental things that are consistent through the world. The environmental science that makes this world tick, right? So we'll talk about some environmental systems. We'll talk about the fundamentals of matter and chemistry. We'll talk about the forms of energy and the laws of thermodynamics. We'll talk about the magical ability of photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Then we'll talk about ecosystems, interactions, fundamentals of landscapes, ecoservices, water, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus cycles. Okay, we're probably going to split this in half. So you're going to get half of this today, and then half of the next half on the next Thursday. Okay. So the quote for this chapter is, "Learn how to see. Realize that everything connects to everything." And that's what I love about environmental science. Everything is connected. Remember I told you, environmental science is jack of all trades, master of none. Well, you need to be a jack of all trades, master of none, is because everything's connected. You pull that butterfly wing effect. The butterfly flaps its wings over in Germany. It affects us over here in Pittsburgh as well. Okay. So hopefully as we go through this, you'll see that everything ties together, right? And it's just a big old circle. We're in a closed loop facility here when it comes to planet Earth. There's nothing like it. So the case study for this chapter is the vanishing oysters of Chesapeake Bay. What a great case study this is. I mean, it's a hopeful case study too. I think Chesapeake Bay has done a lot of good of cleaning them up. All right, but this shows how things are really connected, because Chesapeake Bay once was the most economically productive oyster harvesting area uh, we had here in the United States. I mean, it was just pumping out the oysters, and then it has experienced a complete collapse in the past century. I mean, it has just almost been devastated. Okay, and we're working real hard trying to bring it back. All right, now, the Chesapeake Bay watershed is an area of land that drains uh, into a body of water through rivers, delivers nutrients to same fields and underwater grasses. So all the water that's coming off the continent there is draining down through the watershed into the rivers and lakes and out into the Chesapeake Bay watershed area. And oysters, their ecological niche is to keep the water clear by filtering all the nutrients and plankton to kind of like clean that water for us. That's their ecological service. They're cleaning up all that stuff that's running off into those rivers and streams and down into the watershed area, and the oysters eat it up and clean it up for us. Okay, very important ecological service. By 2010, though, the oyster population were down to 1% of their levels before commercial harvesting took place. So it was a big collapse in the oyster population in Chesapeake Bay area. A lot of things have contributed to this. One of the major ones is that the bay has also been polluted by excessive nitrogen and phosphorus. And we'll learn about the nitrogen and phosphorus cycle and how this happens later on in this chapter. From the fertilizing of the animals, manure, fossil fuel combustions in the watershed. So when the farmers are out there fertilizing the fields, they've been putting on too much fertilization on the lands. The plants start eating it up, so the rain comes and washes all that fertilizer into the water stream, right, watershed, into the rivers, and eventually makes it out to the Chesapeake Bay area. And that has been killing some of the oysters in the area, because these nutrients combined with the loss of oysters have led to overpopulation of phytoplankton, which means we're getting what's called dead zones. We're getting algae bloom. The next thing you know, all you got is all this algae out there. And the EPA has identified the bay as dangerously polluted waters and has begun to restore it. So we are working on restoring the Chesapeake Bay area to bring back these oysters and making sure that they're safe. And it's been a pretty good. We've done a pretty good job so far, okay, of cleaning it up and getting the system back to the way it originally was. So a system is defined as a network of relationships among parts that influence each other in the exchange of energy, matter, and information. All right, so it is just a relationship among parts that influence each other through exchange of energy, matter, and information. Chesapeake Bay receives inputs from all the fresh water, sediment, nutrients, and pollution from its watershed, from all the land and all that stuff running off into the um, rivers, and then it makes it into the watershed at Chesapeake. And there are many ways to delineate natural systems. Okay. Scientists divide Earth's components into spheres. Not spears, spheres. First is a lithosphere, which is the rock and sediment in the plant and upper mantle of the crust. So it's just the crust, the areas right that we're walking on, basically. Then we have the atmosphere, which is in the air surrounding the planet. And then we have the hydrosphere, which encompasses all the water, salty, fresh, solid, liquid, and vapor water out there. And then we have the biosphere, which includes all the living organisms in the earth and non-living components that they interact with. So we got the lithosphere, which is the rocks and the sediment and the dirt and things like that. We got the atmosphere, all the air that's out there that we're breathing. We got the hydrosphere, which is basically all the water, and that could be either fresh, that could be water that we see and swim in, or it can also be the water that's caught in the ice in the Antarctic, or it could be the water vapor that's in the atmosphere. And then we also had the biosphere, which is all the living organisms. So you're part of the biosphere, and I'm part of the biosphere. So is that dog and the cat and the bunny, right? And the trees, right? And so environmental science uses a systems approach in solving problems in that are multifaceted and complex. So all these different compartments, these spheres, are all tied together. The hydrosphere affects the lithosphere, which affects the atmosphere, which affects the biosphere. So all these are all intertwined, and when one tugs on the other, it affects the other. So a system's output may serve as input back into a system in a process called a feedback loop, right? And there's what's called negative and positive feedback loops. So a negative feedback loop results when a system moving in one direction acts as an input that causes the system to move in the opposite direction. Okay? So negative feedback kind of enhances stability of the system. So we see here in this little diagram, it's too hot, right? Your brain tells you it's too hot, so it tells you to seek shade or it sweats. And then the body cools to be able to balance the system again. Adversely, if it's too hot, your brain tells you to go get some clothes on, wrap yourself in a blanket, or your body will start shivering and the body warms, hence bringing back the system into balance. Okay. Now, that's not to say that the negative feedback loop will bring the system back into balance. You need to be smart enough to start wearing some clothes when you're cold. Put on a coat when you're cold. If that doesn't happen, you're not going to get warm, right? I don't care how much you shiver. Okay, if you're out there in the cold, or if you're sweating, if you're too hot, if you don't calm down, you're not going to cool off. Okay. But that's what a negative feedback system is supposed to do. It's supposed to enhance the stability of the system. Negative feedback systems in a process that moves in opposing directions, and it's called a dynamic equilibrium. All right, we're trying to get back to that dynamic equilibrium. This continues homeostasis and tendencies of the system to maintain stable internal conditions. All right. So the steady state system may change over time, as seen through gradual experiences by the Earth. So changes in atmosphere and ocean composition could change, have a gradual change. Okay, and it's not the same as it was before. Global warming is an example of this. Right. Believe it or not, the Earth one time had a ton of carbon, a lot more carbon dioxide than we had before in the atmosphere, a lot more CO2. But we also didn't have anybody living here on the planet, which is full of a bunch of volcanoes and spewing carbon into the atmosphere. Right, and slowly but surely, the plants came along. The phytoplankton and the plants and everything else, and started sucking that carbon out in the atmosphere and sequestering it into the earth, all right, storing that carbon in different areas of the earth. And guess what? That brought down the temperature of the earth to this nice temperature that we don't feel it today. Well, we'll go over climate change in another chapter. But we lived, and humanity grew up in this nice, stable, constant temperature. All right, and that's because it used to be really hot, and then the plants and everything sucked out the CO2 into the earth. All right, and sequestered in the trees and down in the soil and all this other stuff, bringing the temperature of the earth down, and we grew up in this nice stable climate. And now humans' role in the environment is we're releasing that carbon back out into the atmosphere that's been stored for millions of years, hence making it hotter again. All right. And we'll learn a little bit more of this during the climate change chapter. So positive feedbacks occur when the increased output in the system leads to an increased input which further stimulates the output. Okay, so here we see the the ice covering out there. I guess say this is the Arctic Ocean or whatever. Okay, so the sun's down here beating up, and it hits the ice in the snowbanks in the Arctic, and it reflects the sun up or reflects the heat. So the sun can't penetrate into here, right? It's not absorbing this heat. So if this was all black, well, what happened? This would be all nice and hot, right? But the snow is cold because it's called the albedo effect. It's reflecting the sunlight back out into space. Okay. But as the climate has been warming, what has been happening is that the ocean is not holding as much ice in it as much as it used to. And now those sun rays are getting into this darker area, right? They can actually see the ocean, and the ocean is starting to absorb that, making that hotter. Hence, it's having a positive feedback loop. Okay? And then as this gets a little bit hotter, and the atmosphere around it gets a little hotter, more and more ice melts and the snow melts. And now we have the land up here where the sun is actually shining on the land, and the land is starting to absorb some of that heat, causing this positive feedback loop. Okay? We have more water exposed, more land exposed. It's going to get a little bit hotter and hotter, and the more heat that can be trapped. So that is called a positive feedback loop. And that's what we're actually seeing here with the climate change, but we'll talk about that during the climate change chapter. Systems are not isolated. They may exchange energy, matter, and information with other systems. And how a system is defined may depend on what you're studying. For example, a scientist studying runoff, precipitation that flows over the land into a waterway might define Chesapeake Bay area watershed as the system. A science studying hypoxia would define the bay as its watershed as the system. So when we think about a system, we need to define its area. All right, and the Earth is one big old system, but Chesapeake watershed area is another system. Whereas the Three Rivers here in Pittsburgh is another system. So you got to properly plan your area when you're looking at a system. So to understand the dead zones that are happening in Chesapeake Bay, we have to include both watershed and airshed and geography areas that produce pollutants likely to end up in the watershed. So you can see this whole area right here in green is part of the system, Chesapeake Bay area water system, according to this scientist defined area. Okay, and there's a lot of different things affecting the watershed area. You got the forests that are stopping some of the runoff and cleaning some of the water for you. You got the energy industry that's adding more pollutants into the watershed area. Okay, you got the cities and the people adding stuff into the watershed area, and you also have the farms and stuff adding stuff into the watershed area. So like I said, in environmental science, you need to be a jack of all trades because all these things are affecting the environment or the system of the Chesapeake Bay area. All right. And when they're talking about the dead zones, is what's happening here is all this runoff and extra nitrogen and fertilizer and stuff from these areas and CO2 and all this stuff from the industry is running off and getting into the watershed. And what they're doing is actually all this fertilizer and nitrogen causes what's called an algae bloom. We get a ton of algae. And we'll see a picture of this, I think, coming up. And the algae sucks up all the oxygen out of the water because it's so plentiful and there's a lot of algae. They take out all the oxygen out of the water, hence the fish can't live in that water anymore and they go somewhere else. So they go swimming out here over here where there is water. So right here would be right off the runoff, right off the coast. You see this is the coast, right? All the stuff runs into here, and this is where the algae starts blooming up. And then when this blooms up, they take out all the oxygen out of the area. It becomes a dead zone because all the fish try to find the places where there is some oxygen for them to be able to breathe.
So in 2015, the majority of the nitrogen and phosphorus nutrient pollution entering the Bay Area, the Chesapeake Bay Area, came from agriculture. It's one of the biggest contributors to the dead zones around the world. Only about a third came from the atmospheric sources. Okay, so you can see the agriculture, manure, natural sources, urban runoff, municipal industrial waste. So then you can see here is even more. Right. So when I went to West Virginia University for my PhD in natural resource management, we talked about this all the time. We work with the farmers, right? And you hear me say this, and this is just my opinion, all right? I always say that plants are smart. They don't really eat more than they need, all right? They're not going to suck up more nitrogen or phosphorus that they need to. Right? They know how to eat a balanced diet, I guess. But what's been happening with the agriculture area industry is that they just kind of willy nilly have been throwing this fertilizer and phosphorus all over the field because it's cheap. It's real dirt cheap. I mean, it comes from a natural gas. I get it pennies on a dollar. I mean, it's really cheap stuff to do, and all plants need this fertilizer to grow, nitrogen and phosphorus to grow, and then just throw them on there. And all this stuff is actually wasted. And then through the runoff, it goes down and runs off the farms right into the watershed, causing these dead zones. Feeding that phosphorus is no longer feeding those plants, it's feeding the algae or plankton in the watershed. They bloom up and take out all the oxygen, causing that dead zone. So what we do with the farmers at WVU, we would kind of calculate, like I said, I think plants are smart. They only eat so much. We would help them calculate how much nitrogen and phosphorus to actually put on their fields so that we can prevent that runoff. The plants are actually uptaking it and not leaving it there on the dirt for it to be washed off into the rivers. All right. Another big problem is also the manure. All right. And when we talk about the agriculture, we're talking about how we have these confined feeding lots and stuff like that. A lot of the cows and pigs and chickens and stuff put a lot of the manure, and that's just the same thing. There's a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus in their poop. And when I was with WVU, we used to go to the farmers and talk about how we can control that poop of not getting into the water stream, okay, and trying to handle it better. And that's called best management practices. And that's what we do to try to solve this kind of stuff. We try to look at it in a fundamental way to know how a plant grows, how much nitrogen and phosphorus it needs, and just try to put that much on the land instead of just doing it willy-nilly. And you can see what actually happens here. We have the freshwater runoff, and the plankton gets up in here, all right? And the fish eventually just can't live in this area because they're taking out all the oxygen out of the area, all right? So there ends up being a high mortality rate due to the high population density of the algae, okay? So there's more than 500 documented dead zones caused by nutrient pollutions all over the world. Right, and you can see they're all right next to the coast, right, in high populated areas. Okay, and every year these things happen. Right, it's not only if you Google the dead zone of the Gulf, that's probably one of the most famous ones. This one gets bigger and bigger every year from all the runoff from the Mississippi into the Gulf of Mexico, and it costs a lot of money. Right, and what I mean by that is that when that runoff comes in during the springtime, right, causes that algae bloom, and that algae takes out all the oxygen, all the fish leave, right? And that causes the farmer or the fisherman to have to go out farther to catch their catch. And that adds on cost to the cost of the fish, right? Because they have to go out longer. The good thing is, though, Mother Nature, everything's connected, right? And each system works together. So, we have the crops being planted in the fall, and the algae blooms happen. In the summertime, all of a sudden, we have this big old dead zone, all right? But then winter time comes around, and we don't plant anymore. Fields are, laying fallow, and there's not all that extra nitrogen and phosphorus going in. And what will happen is the tides in the ocean in the Gulf of Mexico will start stirring this up again and bring back that oxygen, right, into this area, and the fish will come back and everything will be back to normal. But then again, next spring happens, and all that fertilizer and stuff goes down the Mississippi, and we get another algae bloom. It gets bigger and bigger each year, but eventually goes away, right? And then the next year it gets bigger, and then the next year it gets bigger. I don't think we've had one that actually shrank over time, right? I might be wrong on that, but typically I see new largest dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico every year and year. I mean, that's one of the headlines I see a lot, right? So understanding environmental science requires more of a basic properties of matter, energy, and chemistry. Um, so, environmental sciences, you really need to understand your matter, your energy, and chemistry, because everything is connected and everything's made out of matter, and chemistry helps take care of that matter. So matter is defined as any material that has mass or occupies space. So you have mass. My computer right here has mass, right? And chemistry studies the interaction of this matter. So different types of matter interacting with other matter is the chemistry. All right. So matter is any material that has mass or occupies space, and chemistry studies the interaction of that matter together. Okay? So the law of conservation of matter, which you need to know for the test, is that the matter can be transformed from one type of substance to another, but cannot be created or destroyed. Right? It's kind of like a misnomer here in the human population that we actually create things. All right? We don't create anything. All we actually do is just move around a couple molecules to make something else. Okay? Well, nothing is we cannot create or destroy that matter. Right? So matter in ecosystem constantly constantly goes through a cycle, a big circle. Right? We'll go through what's called the geochemical cycles at the end of this chapter. Right? And undesirable matter like nuclear waste and pollution cannot be destroyed. It's always here. I love Hillary Clinton. She's a wonderful woman. But I remember during one of her debates with the good old Donald Trump, they were talking about Flint, Michigan, with the lead problem. I don't know if you guys know about the lead problem that's going on. It's still going on. Flint is still not fixed. But there was a lot of lead in the pipes, and kids were getting poisoned with lead poisoning. Okay, and Hillary said, "I don't want to just fix Flint. I want to get rid of all the lead in the earth." And I'm like, that's like impossible, right? The only way we're going to get rid of that lead is to actually gather it all together, put it on a rocket ship, and get it off this planet, right? Because lead will be here for us always, all right? So with the nuclear waste, all right, because that's a element. So if you see that periodical element chart of elements on there, your science labs and stuff, that is that matter, and that stuff will always be with us. All right, we can never get rid of it. We'll never get more of it. We'll never get rid of it. Okay. Now, having said that, there might be an asteroid out there or a comet that comes and strikes the Earth and brings us a couple more molecules of lead or of water or something like that. But in reality, we really aren't going to have any more matter on this Earth that's already here. Right? And we cannot create it and we cannot destroy it, but we can make it less useful. That's what the key is. All right, and that is actually the second law of thermodynamics, and we'll talk about here in a little bit. Nuclear reactors use an element called uranium to power their reactors, and the elements are substance of specific properties that cannot be broken down into substance with other properties. So uranium is the basic element, right? So, we can never get rid of our nuclear waste. We can heat it up, that uranium all the way up, and use it for all those years. but then becomes useless to us, and actually becomes toxic to us. All right, so we can't get rid of, you can't create or destroy the matter, but we can make it less useful. These are organized according to properties of behavior, periodical table of elements. Okay, so all those things on the periodic table of elements, we cannot create them, we cannot destroy them, but we can make them a little bit less useful. So atoms are the smallest unit that still have all the elements chemical properties. All right, so atoms of each element are made of 3 particles. You got your protons, your neutrons, your electrons. I hope you guys all remember this from your old science classes. So protons are positively charged, neutrons have no charge, and electrons are negatively charged. The most abundant elements on the Earth are oxygen, hydrogen, silicon, nitrogen, and carbon. All right. So molecules are combinations of 2 or more atoms chemically bonded together, such as O2, 2 oxygen molecules bonded together. The molecule is made of 2 or more different elements. It's classified as a compound. So H2O or CO2 are examples of compounds because they have 2 elements, the hydrogen and oxygen, which are bonded together, or the carbon and oxygen, which are bonded together. Okay. Atoms form bonds due to interactions with their electrons. So we have what's called an ionic bond, which occurs when the ions are differently charged and attract and bind to each other. And we have what's called covalent bonds, from when electrons are shared between atoms that lack an electrical charge. Atoms and molecules can also come together in mixtures where they don't react with each other. They're evenly distributed in a mixture, and this is called a solution. All right? In aqueous solutions, a small number of water molecules split apart into hydrogen and hydroxide ions. And pure water contains equal concentrations of these 2 ions and is considered neutral. All right, so that's the acidic part. The acidic solutions have high concentration of hydrogen ions, and basic or alkaline solutions have lower concentrations of ionic ions. So we want to try to be in a pH neutral. All right, that's basically where we live on the branch. So right here is the pure water. All right, and it has what's called pH of around 7. I don't know if you guys have a pool or anything like that. When you go out there and you test the pool water, you always want to make sure that the pH is around 7, 7.5 to 6.5. Okay, right here in this neutral area. And you are actually, if you got your blood out and then tested your blood with one of those pool strips, or actually went to the bathroom in a cup and tested your stuff in your pee in that cup, it should be neutral. All right, believe it or not, that's one of the tests they do in the hospital. If they find that your pH level is way off, it's way above 7 or below 7, something's wrong with you. All right, and almost everything out there in the world is kind of that neutral balance. All right. But we do have some stuff that's not neutrally balanced, of course. Okay, the more you get up here, like the ammonia, right? But you know how dangerous that can be do if you go out and you sniff that ammonia. Okay, well, ammonia is also needed. So, and also acid rain or lemon juice, right, or car battery, real acidic. Okay, but we make those for different purposes, right? So, but we try to live, humans try to live in this neutral area. But we have other things that are either high acidic or low acidic. Organic compounds are made from carbon atoms joined together with covalent bonds. One of the most important class of organic compounds is hydrocarbons, which contain hydrogen and carbon. And these hydrocarbons are the fossil fuels and petroleum products that we use every day. All right, and that's what we're actually doing when we're going to get that natural gas, that coal, um, and the oil in the ground. We are actually trying to capture those hydrocarbons. All right, because those hydrocarbons burn real good for us. We're able to burn them and get a good bang for our buck, and they're all over the place. And we can also use it for a lot of different things like plastics and other things as well. All right, but we'll go through that a little bit more during the energy section. So organic compounds also include what's called polymers, so which are long chains of repeated molecules. And polymers and lipids are referred to as macromolecules because they are so large. Then we also have what's called proteins, which are the polymers made of amino acids. They are found in our skin, our hair, our muscles, part of the immune system, as well as immunize catalysts for chemical reactions. So we're full of these proteins. We also have nucleic acids, which including deoxyribonucleic or DNA and our RNA. They contain the blueprints for producing all the proteins in living things. We have nucleic acids, which are polymers made of molecules called nucleotides, and that's the region of our DNA that encodes our specific protein. It gives us our genes, our genetic makeup. We also have what's called carbohydrates, which are just basically simple sugars, right? Glucose, which is our blood sugar, cellulose, which is found in it's like basically a sugar in the leaves and bark and stems of the roots of trees. And we also have chitin, which is an insect exoskeleton, so that shell around that hard beetle. It's called chitin, or the chitin around a shrimp. Okay. Lipids are a diverse group of molecules that do not dissolve in water. So all your fats and oils. Try putting that fat and that oil in the water, it's not going to mix up whatsoever, right? Well, they actually store a lot of the energy, and that's what we actually like our oil that we use suck out of the ground. That's actually an old lipid oil, right, from way back when, millions of years old. Lipid oils. Okay. We also have waxes and steroids, which are part of this lipid family that help us out. So energy. Energy is our capacity to change the position, composition, or temperature of matter. Basically, our ability to do work. And we have two kinds of energy. We have the potential energy, which is energy of position. For example, a river held behind a dam contains potential energy. That rock on top of the mountain contains potential energy. The gas in your gas tank is potential energy. Then we have what's called kinetic energy, which is energy in motion. So when that rock is rolling down the hill, that is kinetic energy. When that water is falling over the waterfall, that is kinetic energy. Or going through the dam, that is kinetic energy. And when your car is rolling down the road, it's kinetic energy. Energy is able to be converted back and forth between these two forms. All right, so kinetic energy can become potential energy, and potential energy become kinetic energy. Chemical energy, which is another form of energy, is a potential energy stored in the bonds among atoms. Right? When a molecule with high energy bonds are converted into molecules with low energy bonds, the release of energy can be produced in the motion, action, or heat. Right? An example of chemical energy would be your batteries, all right, in your cell phone. That's chemical energy, and then we transform that into electricity. Energy can change from one form to another, but cannot be created or destroyed, right? That's the first law of thermodynamics. We cannot create or destroy matter, hence we cannot create or destroy the energy. This is the first law of thermodynamics. The nature of energy tends to change from order to less order, states of change. This is the second law of thermodynamics, okay? So hence we can't create or destroy matter. When we burn that chunk of coal, all right, we cannot we're not destroying any of those molecules in there. We're just breaking them down into their different parts, right? Some gets released into the atmosphere through the burning, and some just stays there in the ash, right? But unfortunately, we cannot scoop that back up and use it again right away, right? So it goes from more order and a nice little chunk of coal to a bunch of disorder, right? Some out there in the atmosphere, some in the fire pit. It's all over the place. So coal, we can't use it again. Now, having said that, some of those molecules that went up into the atmosphere might get sucked up by a tree again and end up being covered up by the earth and moved around in a million years. It might become coal again, right? But I'm not going to be around in a million years to make sure that that experiment worked out okay. Okay. So we got the first law of thermodynamics to say energy cannot be created or destroyed, and we got the second law of energy that says we go from more order to less order state as it changes forms. Okay. For example, we got the log on a log of firewood right here, right? So we got all this nice little order going on in this wood and this rock pile here, right? We got a nice little order on all these logs. Then we light it on fire and we lose a little bit of that wood. We releases CO2 in the atmosphere as HO2 out in the atmosphere. It gives off some light in the form of energy. It gives off the heat, right? So all these things are now gone, and all we have is this pile of ash. Okay, so we cannot use this again, and this stuff is not going to be burned. But maybe this CO2 or this HO2 will eventually get into another tree, and maybe we'll be able to use it again in the next tree and burn it. Okay. We also have light energy, which is from the sun. And the sun powers most living systems. If it wasn't for the sun, we would not be here. All right. There's a lot of. The sun is our primary energy source. All right. The sun releases energy from a wide range of electromagnetic spectrums, but much of it is filtered out by our atmosphere. So thank goodness we have our atmosphere the way we do, because we would not be able to actually live. Well, we might be able to. Who knows? We might have developed a little bit different. But right now, without that atmosphere around us, we would actually, without the ozone layer that we talked about last week, we would all be, cancer. We would all have skin cancer. It would be crazy. Okay? Because some of these things, such as the gamma rays and the X-rays, don't necessarily get through the atmosphere to hurt us, right? But we live in this area, humans, in this visible light area, all right? And this is what we can actually be able to sense, all right, is this visible light. But there's also radio waves, microwaves, infrared, right? And we live in this area, and then we have the X-rays and gamma rays. But all these things still exist on the light spectrum, right? But here is the only way we can see with our own eyes, and we can pick these things up as well. We know this stuff exists, but we just don't see it with our eyes. Light energy, like I said, light energy powers most living systems in this world. So we would not be here if it weren't for the autotrophs, right? They use the sun's radiation to directly produce their own food. So they have this magic ability to take the sun's light and convert it into chemical energy stored inside of them, right? And then we are able to use that chemical energy, all right? And this is called the process of photosynthesis. It's able to transform molecules from low energy bonds into sugar molecules of high energy bonds. So without the autotrophs being able to take that sunlight and convert it into chemical energy, we would not be around. So this is a magical thing. This is what this photosynthesis really makes the world go around. All right, the sun's shining, the plant's converting it, and then we using that energy, because we can't eat sunlight, unfortunately. We can't just go out there and lay out and get a suntan and get fed too. Okay? But we have the plants there that are able to do that. That photosynthesis is how they do that. So, of course, photosynthesis occurs in a single organelle called chloroplast. The pigment is called chlorophyll, right? So the sunlight comes in here, and they're able to take this and put this into all these different things, right? To the CO2, and they make the sugars that we are eating, and the proteins, and the lipid oils, and everything else. So if it wasn't for this photosynthesis changing the sunlight into chemical bonds inside of itself, we would have nothing to eat. Okay? So photosynthesis produces food for plants and animals, like I've been saying. The overall process of photosynthesis can be, it's basically all these different things plus the sun's energy equals all the chemical bonds that we eat, right? And the number before each molecule formula indicates how many of these molecules are involved in the reaction. There is an equal number of each atom on each side of the reaction. Okay? The plants take in the water through their roots, absorb the carbon dioxide through the air, through their leaves, and harness the power of sunlight to generate the sugars and the oxygen that we use to survive. All by using sunlight. Not all primary production requires sunlight, though. Okay, there's some bacteria in deep sea vents. You might see those down there in Jacques Cousteau's specials. If you guys even know who Jacques Cousteau is, it was more my era. But if you go down to those thermal vents down there in the bottom of the ocean, you'll see these little tubers, right? And we were just amazed when we actually discovered that they were down there, all right? Because we thought nothing could live without sunlight. But what they're actually using is just the sulfur down there, hydrogen sulfide, in these vents. And that is how they're going. They're able to transform inorganic carbon into organic compounds through chemosynthesis. All right, that's how they do it. And that's an amazing thing too. And that's why we say, hey, there might be other parts of life out there that we don't know about on other planets, because we didn't even think that these cats could live on Earth. So what else can be out there on some of the moons of Neptune? Okay, like the energy from photosynthesis, the energy from chemosynthesis moves through the deep sea vents, animals, and vent community. And that's what keeps those deep sea vents alive. All right, so I think this is where we're going to stop so we can, okay, so let's stop right here, and then on Thursday we will review the rest of this chapter, okay? So I will be uploading this pretty soon. Remember that this week we have Chapter 2 review sheet and current event 1. All right, this is due, I think, on Friday. This one's still due on Friday. I still have it posted up. And chapter review is due on Sunday. All right, and then after that, we are going to have every Wednesday and Sunday for your assignments. Okay? Like I said, if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to give me a call or drop me an email. All right? Thanks. We'll be seeing you soon.